Global business news from the boardroom or grassroots, BBC News cuts through the jargon to add colour, depth and context. With live reaction from Wall Street and Asia, studio interviews with top CEOs and the latest innovations in technology. Talking Business.
Hello and welcome to Talking Business. Here's what's on the programme this week. Term 2 for Trump, but 6 months in, how are the US president's economic plans being felt at home and around the world? It's not just trade and tariffs where the president is leaving his mark, but everything from tax to energy and raw materials. We'll ask where his raft of new policies are really having an impact. I'll discuss that with these two. One of America's most respected economists talks us through the achievements so far and the challenges for the rest of President Trump's time in office. Plus, this billionaire American mining entrepreneur tells us why President Trump's tariffs on copper and other metals are crucial to the future of the world's biggest economy. And potato. Is there another way of seeing the humble spud? Can we really make the popular potato chip healthier? I'll speak to this Israeli business leader to find out how she's putting more protein in our potatoes and how it could help keep a growing population fed. Wherever you're watching, welcome to the programme. We're now 6 months into Donald Trump's second term as President of the United States. In that time, he's made huge efforts to reshape the US economy. And as the world's biggest, it impacts the rest of us too. Trade and tariffs have received a huge amount of attention since his inauguration in January. But there have also been sweeping reforms, including tax cuts and major spending plans. Other areas of the economy, like energy and raw materials, have been in his sights, and immigration controls have affected the jobs market. So, what's the big plan, and where is it all heading?
My message to every business in the world is very simple. Come make your product in America, and we will give you among the lowest taxes of any nation on earth. We're bringing them down very substantially, even from the original Trump tax cuts. But if you don't make your product in America, which is your prerogative, then very simply you will have to pay a tariff, differing amounts, but a tariff which will direct hundreds of billions of dollars and even trillions of dollars into our treasury to strengthen our economy and pay down debt.
President Trump inherited an economy that had been growing steadily for 3 years. And whilst it shrank at the start of this year, it's expected to return to growth when the next set of numbers are published. One of the persistent problems is inflation. It remains stubbornly high. It's proving tough to get back to the central bank's target of 2%. The other part of their job is to keep Americans in work, and the unemployment rate has remained around what's regarded as historic lows. Amid a lot of uncertainty, the Federal Reserve has kept US interest rates between 4.25% and 4.5% for a while. Remember, they're the main tool for tackling inflation and unemployment. Even though the central bank is independent, President Trump has been clear. He wants lower rates and has repeatedly attacked its chair, Jerome Powell.
And he's got it wrong. That's why I call him too late, T-O-O, too late. And it's really too bad. But it is affecting people that want to buy houses, and that shouldn't happen. And you know, he should lower them. Those rates should be 3 points lower. That's what they should be, 3 points lower, maybe more than that.
Perhaps the biggest uncertainty hanging over the US economy is over how it trades with the rest of the world. Tariffs in various forms have been threatened, delayed and implemented repeatedly over the last 6 months. One of the aims of those import taxes is to force other countries to change what President Trump says are unfair trade practices, meaning American companies aren't competing on a level playing field. Another central aim is to reduce the trade deficit, which hit a record $1.2 trillion last year. That's how much more America bought from other countries compared to what it sold them. The biggest deficits are, by some distance, with China, Mexico and Vietnam, the last of which is one of a few countries to make a trade deal. And the tariffs that are in place are bringing in record amounts of money to government coffers, which will help, to some degree, with a soaring national debt. But critics say the constant change in tariff policy is making life difficult for the very companies powering the US economy, as one toy store owner recently explained to our economics editor, Faisal Islam.
We won't print any prices on our catalog this year. So we're making that change.
Well, that's quite fundamental.
It is, yeah. But
so that's what you just say. You can't put prices in because it's so uncertain.
It's so uncertain. Other business people, I know home builders that have loaded up on lumber and are storing it on empty lots. Steel manufacturers that have loaded up on steel, anticipating the increase in prices.
So there's a lot to get through. And the big question is, does a blitz of policy changes amount to a coherent vision for America's economy? One that will cement its status as the world's biggest and most influential for years to come. It's something I've been discussing with the president of the Peterson Institute for International Economics. It's a non-partisan think tank and one of the most respected voices in Washington. Adam Posen, welcome to Talking Business. And look, like him or loathe him, President Trump has been pretty busy since his inauguration. What's your sort of overall assessment of what we've seen from the White House and this administration in terms of its economic impact right now?
I think, Ben, the economic impact is largely bad, but largely to come. I think he and his administration have very deliberately torn up a bunch of relationships and institutions and practices that businesses and investors all around the world, as well as foreign governments, have been counting on. And I think it's going to backfire on global business and on the US, but it's a reality. And now that it's happened, people have to adjust.
Yeah, and some suggesting this is a radical reshaping of the way that the world does business. You say it's detrimental or could be detrimental to the US economy. Why then is he doing it?
His understanding of the economy is fundamentally incorrect. He sees trade imbalances, for example, as bilateral trade imbalances as something important, and they're not. He sees a renaissance of manufacturing old industries as in the US interests, and it's not. And I could go on. Second, he is delivering other things for key constituencies. The fiscal package includes some things that are good, some things that are bad for the country as a whole. And I think he has a genuine, sincere belief that the rest of the world has been ripping off the US, which I find a little bit absurd and no evidence to back, but that's a huge part of his motivation.
So here we are 6 months in, a raft of policies, as we've touched on. What do you fear is the outcome of these policies, and when might we feel it?
Probably the most economically damaging policy is the enormous anti-migration efforts. And if we leave aside the human aspects, which is hard to do because they're horrifying, but if you just look at it as an economic factor, you are essentially shrinking the labor supply of the US and thereby removing productive workers. If it works out the way mainstream analysis would suggest, that when you go from gaining on average of 2 million workers a year to having net zero growth in the workforce, that should, frankly, cause both inflation and a recession.
Do you see any glimmer of hope in so much as, that continuing in the same way is maybe not a viable option? It's about redressing the balance, as President Trump says, in the favor of the United States. Is there any sense that actually a big shake-up of the way that the world does business was long overdue?
I don't believe so. As I said, there are glimmers of hope in AI, which the Trump administration has nothing really to take credit for or blame for. I think that there are some adjustments of the more normal Republican way that are reasonable, especially after the Biden administration. But in the end, fiscal irresponsibility, closing your borders to migrants, and closing your borders to competition and efficient inputs, and creating uncertainty, none of these are positive for any economy at any time. I mean, I think the legitimate point, Ben, was the issue of China and national security, that the US should have been treating China differently in some ways.
I wonder where all of this leaves American consumers. So we know that some of these tariffs will be inflationary, pushing up prices for ordinary Americans. How long can they bear that?
They can bear for a while. I mean, estimates from the Peterson Institute by Gary Huffbauer and others have shown that over $1 trillion a year, it's now probably 1.5 trillion, of US income exists because of the benefits of globalization directly to consumers. And some of that's going to go away. And it's not clear that doing this will suddenly create jobs or profits in the US, because who, as was pointed out in response to Commerce Secretary Lutnick, American workers aren't going to sit there and screw in screws in the backs of iPhones. And doing so is not going to create good high-wage jobs.
But Adam, I wonder whether we're all looking at this wrong. I mean, President Trump's on record saying, I use trade for a lot of things. It's great for settling wars. I mean, there's so much more about politics here, isn't there, than economics?
I think that's a fair point to raise. And to the degree that you're sacrificing economics for a foreign policy goal, if you have democratic legitimacy to do so, that's a fine choice. For the sake of national security, you may be willing to give up certain amounts of economic efficiency. My problem is they underestimate the costs by an order of magnitude of doing this, and they overestimate the effectiveness of trade measures, sanctions, investment on these issues. And so if that is indeed the motivation of the Trump administration to do a national security rebalancing, then let's have that discussion and debate, but don't throw up a bunch of nonsense about how this is going to help the economy.
Adam Posen, always good to talk to you on the programme. Thank you for your time today. Thanks for being with us on Talking Business.
Thank you for having me.
One industry that could feel it's been singled out for tariffs more than any other is metals and mining. Copper, steel and aluminium are three products given their own tariffs for anything imported into America. President Trump wants them produced at home. But why? And how feasible is it? I've been speaking to the American billionaire mining guru behind Ivanhoe Mines and Ivanhoe Electric, who are trying to make that happen. Robert Friedland, welcome to Talking Business. Good to have you here. And look, so much attention right now on metals and mining. And start at the beginning for us. You know, this has been your career. You've been doing this for a long time. Talk to me about copper particularly. Why all the fuss? Why do we need so much of it?
Copper is used in everything in modern life. It's used in everything electrical, from electrical cars to the transmission and generation of electrical energy. It's used in national defense, and it's used in every attempt to green the world economy, in the electric cars, the batteries, the modern telecommunications. Virtually everything we do is dependent on copper metal, and that's why it's called the king of all metals.
So the king of all metals, and yet President Trump has decided that there will be a 50% tariff on that imported into the United States. Why? It doesn't seem to make sense.
Well, first of all, we don't know about exactly what tariff the United States government will ultimately impose. But in any event, the tariff is useful to draw capital to the United States and reestablish its mining. Less than half of the copper actually that America consumes is mined in the United States. And now all countries in a balkanized world economy are desperate to see their own just-in-case supply on their own territorial imperative.
And why is that so important? Why does it need to be produced in the United States?
Now, maybe we should quote Chairman Xi, the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party and the president of China. He said that the energy rice bowl must be held in our own hands in China. So in a balkanized world economy, each of us needs to make sure for our national security that we have our own supplies. And the new administration of the United States is correctly focused on making sure that the world's largest economy actually has stable access to raw materials at the scale of that economy, rather than being dependent on far-flung and potentially unstable jurisdictions.
And so it's your assessment this isn't about economics or trade. This is about geopolitics and national security.
It's clearly about national security. England produces very, very little copper. Can you think how many copper mines you have? Same thing with continental Europe. And so everybody's going to be scrambling for looking at this metal. As I speak to you today, the nominal price of copper
in the United States is the highest we've ever seen. And it's likely to go a lot higher in the future because everything we're doing in the modern world is dependent on a metal that's increasingly scarce and hard to find.
As you said, so important for the United States, so important for many other countries. And yet America, as you touched on, importing about half of what it needs, even though there's a lot of copper in the ground in the United States. You're building a big new mine. Tell me about that. That's in Arizona. When does that come online? What significant contribution can that make to America's self-dependency?
Well, it's the first new mine to come on stream in the United States in about 20 years in the great state of Arizona. The license plates on the cars in Arizona used to say the copper state. About 10% of the copper mined in human history came from Arizona. So it's an appropriate place to be developing a super modern, ultra green, underground producer of highly refined copper metal directly in the form that you need for electronics, modern cars, data centers. 99.99% pure aluminium grade A copper produced without a smelter. Most copper in the world is produced with smelting, which is an antiquated technology, very capital intensive. It produces a lot of air pollution. And so it's really good that the United States has a domestic source of copper that's clean, green, and in the heart of the industrial belt of Arizona.
So apart from disincentivizing imports of copper, what else are you asking this administration to do? How do they make your life easier to make investments like you're making in Arizona elsewhere?
Well, the U.S. administration, as many others, as has the European Economic Union, has placed copper on the list of critical raw materials, finally understanding that you can't have a modern economy without it. When Steve Jobs built the first iPhone, it only had about 15 elements in the periodic table in that phone. Today, a modern iPhone has about 85 elements. So we need better permitting regime. We need a cleaner, greener way to mine. We need to use big data to find those critical raw materials. And we need to deliver them to market with all of the world's accretive new technologies to do this in a green and conscious way. Without that, we're all going to freeze in the dark.
Yes, I suppose my question is whether you are confident that there is bipartisan political understanding of that need for domestic production, given, for example, that threat from China. I mean, dominating both mining, consumption and refining. If you're putting all that money in, all that investment into somewhere like Arizona, does that continue? Can you keep doing this?
And first of all, we can't blame China for doing anything other than being intelligent. With 1.3 billion people to feed and to clothe and to look after, China looked ahead and realized that they needed these critical raw materials in a very large way. They'd have to go around the world to find these materials because they didn't have them all in their own country. And actually, the interest in this is completely bipartisan. In the United States, the Democratic Party is very much concerned with the greening of the world economy. If you're a Republican, you might be more worried about national security.
And when you were making your business case and doing your research for that plant in Arizona, what is your expectation of where and who you will sell that copper to?
Only about 4.5 miles east of us, Lucid Motors, an electric car company, is building electric cars. And right up the street, we have Taiwan Semiconductor building semiconductors. None of these things can exist without the copper that we're mining right there in Arizona. I doubt any of the copper that we will produce will leave the state of Arizona.
It's a good time to be in.
Well, we've been in mining for a long time. It's the most basic of all industries. It is cyclical, but at the current moment, as I'm speaking to you, copper in nominal terms at about $5.80 a pound is the highest price it's been in human history. And we think it has nowhere to go but up. As a species, we've mined 700 million metric tons of copper in the last 5,000 years. Just to maintain 3% GDP growth, without the electrification of the world economy, we need to mine that same quantum of copper in the next 20 years. And so the mining industry is scrambling to explain this problem to host governments, that we need government support. We need a better way to mine. So for the rest of your life, you're going to see a continued scramble to provide the metals we need for a modern economy. This problem is just simply not going to go away.
And the theme of our programme this week really is looking at the state of the US economy 6 months after President Trump's inauguration and looking at some of the big plans that he's put in place to reshape global trade. And I wonder, given what you do, is it your assessment that he is good or bad for the US economy?
Oh, Donald Trump is definitely good for the United States economy. Definitely good. He's brought a completely new series of ways of looking at things to shake the world up and force everybody to see things in a new way. Speaking as a miner, we see a lot more government support and understanding that everything you touch comes from a supply chain. In previous administrations, people thought that a ham sandwich comes from a refrigerator, but a ham sandwich does not come from a refrigerator. So, looking at the supply chain and stimulating the supply chain in a new and modern way is something this administration is doing. And it's very helpful to those of us that actually have to deliver the goods.
Robert Friedland, so good to talk to you on the programme this week. Thank you for being with us on Talking Business.
Thank you, Ben.
We've been talking about how President Trump is reshaping the American economy, and the food industry is no exception. Growing populations need more food, but where will it come from? Well, one way might be healthier potatoes. An Israeli startup called PoLoPo is working on potatoes engineered to have 3 times more protein than normal. And food that's rich in protein helps us feel fuller for longer. So I've been finding out how it works from the company's co-founder. Dr. Maya Sapir-Mir, welcome to the programme. And my first question, what is it you do?
What we do is just elevating the protein content of the regular potato that we know. Regular potato don't contain high amounts of proteins, and we are elevating the protein content in the tuber, the part that we actually eat. Today, we are commercializing our varieties to cheap brands, mainly in the US. Technology can be implemented into almost any variety of potatoes. We are bioengineering the potato. It's not just a regular potato, but it's a very straightforward process. We do it once, and then you can grow those protein-rich potatoes just like regular potato in an open field all around the world. Just the potato that we know and love to eat.
What is the problem that you're trying to address here?
Generally speaking, we know that the population in the world is rising, and we need to supply enough food for the growing population. And by that, we need to find more source of proteins. Proteins we usually consume from animal source, but we need more of that. And we need to make our food system more effective. And we need also to diversify the source of protein that we are consuming. So once you can elevate the protein content inside this amazing potato, the sky is the limit, and you have another great source of protein for the world, but also for different industries to use.
And a lot of people will understand that need. We have a growing global population and that food has to come from somewhere. But at the same time, there are still concerns around genetically modified food. How do you overcome those hurdles and convince people that if we are to feed the world with more protein, this might be one of the ways we have to do it?
You are quite right. And there is some concerns around GMOs, but I think first that the world is changing. We already understand that regular breeding is not enough, and there will be no food security without GMOs. Regulatory processes in the US for GMOs already exist. We already submitted to the USDA in order to grow our potatoes. And I also want to say about PoLoPo that we are not bringing genes from different sources. We are just enhancing the genes that we already have in potatoes. So there's almost no risk in what we are doing, but we are bringing a much better potato and much better food to the world.
Well, the reason I ask is that this will all be about perception, won't it? Because there are figures from a few years ago from the Pew Research Centre, and they're pretty clear. They say 48% of people thought that GM foods were unsafe to eat. 37% said they didn't have enough information to make an informed decision or have an opinion. So I assume it is your hope that those numbers have changed and will continue to change.
So yes, of course, I think it already changed. And from our research, it will work, and people want to consume more protein. Even the potato chips, regular potato chips that you see in market already, many of them in the US are contain bioengineered ingredient. We see it with already with the corn, with the soy, with the wheat. So we already are eating bioengineered ingredients, but we just don't know that, and there's no risk.
And when will we be able to buy these products? When are they on the shelves?
It is a potato, and there are cycle of growth, so it will take time. But now we are starting partnering with the chip brands in the US. So I hope that by the end of 2026, you will be able to see our first product in market in the US first.
Dr. Maya Sapir-Mir, thank you for being on the programme with us this week. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
That's all for this week. You can keep up to date with all the latest on the global economy on the BBC News website and smartphone app. But thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Hello there. More cloud than sun has been the story so far this weekend.